The room gets quiet. That's the moment people often mistake for closure. The hard part of the conversation seems to be over. Nobody's pushing back anymore. Nobody's asking for another scenario. Nobody's saying, "I'm not comfortable with this." The founder nods. The operator writes down the next step. Someone says, "Okay, that makes sense." Someone else says, "Yeah, I think we're aligned." The meeting moves on. The recap goes out later that day. It looks clean enough. Everyone has something to do. There's an owner. There's a next step. There might even be a date attached to it. And for a few hours, maybe even a day or two, it feels like the decision is done. Then Wednesday comes. Someone asks a small question. Are we still doing it this way if the customer pushes back? Or did we decide this applies to the whole team or just this one case? Or before we move, should we check with the founder? Or I know we talked about this, but what exactly are we telling sales? And suddenly you realize something. The decision went quiet, but it didn't close. That's what I want to talk about today, because quiet can look very convincing. It can feel like agreement. It can feel like maturity. It can feel like progress. It can feel like the room finally got through the hard part. But quiet is not the same thing as closure. Welcome back to the Hidden Drag Brief. My name is Wojnowski, and today's episode number 11 in the Hidden Drag Brief series, is called Quiet is Not Closed. And this one matters because a lot of hidden drag starts in exactly this place. Not with a loud disagreement, not with an obvious block, not with someone refusing to decide. It starts with a meeting that seemed fine, a conversation that seemed productive, a room that seemed aligned, a decision that seemed settled. But once people went back to the work, the decision started losing clarity. Some decisions stay clear for months. Others lose half their clarity by Wednesday. And that's the decision half-life problem. I don't mean that as a clever phrase, although it is pretty clever. I mean it as a pattern most operators, founders, COOs, chiefs of staff, presidents, and GMs have lived through. The room thinks the decision is done. The work tells the truth a few days later. And the truth is, the decision didn't have enough structure to survive outside the room where it was made. So let's make this practical. Imagine a leadership team talking about a pricing exception. A large customer wants something outside the standard package. Sales is excited because the account is meaningful. Finance is cautious because the margin is thinner than usual. Customer success is worried because the exception will create extra work. Product is worried because the exception could turn into a future commitment. The founder wants to win the customer, but doesn't want every big customer to become a one-off operating model. So the team talks it through. It's a good conversation. Nobody's careless. People are thoughtful. They name some risks. They talk about precedent. They talk about margin. They talk about strategic value. They talk about whether this customer is worth making an exception for. Eventually, the room settles on something like, "We'll make the exception, but we'll be careful not to make this a new standard." That sounds reasonable. It may even be the right call. The room gets quiet. The founder nods. The operator captures the next step. Sales leaves with enough confidence to keep moving. Finance leaves thinking margin still needs watching. Customer success leaves assuming the exception will be contained. Product leaves hoping this doesn't become a roadmap commitment. Everyone leaves feeling like something got decided. But did it? That's the question. Did the team decide who owns exceptions like this going forward? Did they decide what makes an exception worth accepting? Did they decide what sales is allowed to promise? Did they decide what customer success is allowed to push back on? Did they decide whether product has to support the exception? Did they decide what would make this precedent dangerous? Did they decide what would reopen the conversation? If not, the decision may feel closed in the room, but it won't travel cleanly. And that's where the half-life starts to show up. By Wednesday, sales is writing the proposal and asks, Can we phrase this as available for strategic accounts? Customer success asks, are we accepted to support this manually every time? Product asks, does this mean we're building this into the roadmap later? Finance asks, did we accept the lower margin just for this one customer or for this segment? The founder asks, why are we making this sound like a standard option? And the operator is back in the middle, translating a decision that looked settled but didn't hold. And that's the difference. A closed decision can be carried by the system. An almost closed decision has to be carried by people, usually by the operator, sometimes by the founder, sometimes by whoever has the strongest memory of the room, sometimes by whoever can interpret what everyone probably meant. And that's a fragile way to run a company, because memory isn't a decision artifact. Tone isn't a decision artifact. A nod is not a decision artifact. Silence isn't a decision artifact. The meeting ending isn't a decision artifact. If the decision only lives in people's memories of the conversation, it's already vulnerable. That doesn't mean every decision needs bureaucracy. I'm not arguing for more paperwork for the sake of paperwork. I'm not saying every small call needs a formal memo. That would be exhausting, and nobody would use it anyway. But important decisions need enough closure to survive normal pressure. Normal pressure is the key phrase, not crisis pressure, not once-a-year exception. Normal pressure. A customer asks for an exception. A team member wasn't in the meeting. A manager needs to explain the call. A new trade-off appears. The founder has a concern. Sales wants to move quickly. Product wants to protect the roadmap. Finance wants to understand the margin. Customer success wants to know what they're inheriting. If the decision loses clarity under that kind of ordinary pressure, it probably didn't close. It just went quiet. That distinction has taken me a long time to trust. After 40 plus years in and around operating rooms, leadership tables, founder conversations, and very messy handoffs, I've learned to pay a lot less attention to how settled a meeting feels and a lot more attention to what the decision can carry afterward. The room can feel calm and still leave the company with work it can't use. That's the part leaders often miss. They judge closure by the feeling in the meeting, but the system judges closure by behavior after the meeting. Does the team know what to say no to? Does the owner know what they can decide without checking back? Does the founder know when they're being consulted versus when approval is required? Does the operator have to translate the call 3 different ways? Does the decision hold when someone who wasn't in the room asks a reasonable question? Those are better tests than whether the room got quiet. Let's stay with that pricing example for a second. A quiet decision might sound like, we'll make the exception, but let's not make it standard. That sounds useful, but it leaves a lot of work behind. What counts as an exception? Who decides whether it's allowed? What's the threshold? What does not standard mean in the sales deck? What does customer success do if the customer treats it like a promise? What does product do if 3 more customers ask for the same thing? When does the team revisit the decision? A closed version might sound more like, we're approving this exception for the customer only because the account meets the strategic threshold. Sales can describe it as a one-off implementation accommodation, not a standard package option. Customer success owns the manual support plan for 60 days. Product isn't committing roadmap capacity yet. We'll reopen the decision if 2 more customers request the same exception or if support load exceeds the agreed threshold. Now that's longer. It's also less elegant, but it travels. Sales can use it. Customer success can use it. Product can use it. Finance can use it. The operator can point back to it. The founder doesn't have to reinterpret it every 3 days. That's what a closed decision does. It reduces the need for personality-based interpretation. It gives people enough clarity to keep moving when the room is gone. And that is really the point. A decision isn't tested while everyone who made it is still sitting together. It's tested afterward. It's tested in the Slack thread. It's tested in the customer conversation. It's tested in the one-to-one. It's tested when a manager has to explain the call to someone who wasn't there. It's tested when the founder casually comments on something related and the team has to decide whether the comment reopens the call. It's tested when pressure shows up. That's when you find out whether the decision has a long half-life or a short one. A decision with a long half-life stays clear. People may still need to execute. They may still need to coordinate. They may still need to solve details, but they're not constantly rediscovering the decision. A decision with a short half-life starts decaying almost immediately. The words fade, the trade-off blurs, the owner becomes uncertain, the exception path gets fuzzy, the founder gets pulled back in, the operator starts translating, and by the end of the week, the team is no longer acting from the decision. They're acting from fragments of the conversation. That's where hidden drag begins. Not because people are incompetent, not because they don't care, not because the meeting was useless, but because the decision didn't have enough closure to survive contact with the work. This is why I'm careful with the phrase, "we're aligned." It can mean something real, sometimes it does, but it can also mean nobody's objecting right now. Or it can mean we agree with the general direction. It can mean we're tired and ready to move on. It can mean the founder seems comfortable. It can mean the operator will figure out the rest. Those aren't the same thing. Alignment that can't survive the next operational question isn't closure. It's agreement in tone. An agreement in tone is useful, but it's not enough. If you want to know whether a decision actually closed, don't only look at what happened in the meeting. Look at what people do next. Do they make recommendations, or do they bring options back because they're not sure the call will hold? Do they act within the decision, or do they ask the founder to bless every smaller move? Do they explain the trade-off plainly, or do they soften it because they're not sure the room really accepted it? Do they say no cleanly, or does every exception become a fresh debate? Does the owner own the call, or just the follow-up tasks? And that last one matters because a lot of decisions look closed because there's an owner for the work, but there may not be an owner for the call. Someone owns the project plan, someone owns the update, someone owns the dashboard, someone owns the next meeting, but when the decision gets uncomfortable, the call floats back to the room, or back to the founder, or back to the operator. That is not closure. That's task ownership sitting on top of decision ambiguity, and it creates a short half-life. The decision loses clarity because no one knows who has the right to keep it closed. This is especially common in founder-led companies. The founder may think they've delegated the decision. The team may think the founder still needs to approve the uncomfortable parts. The operator may know the practical answer, but not have the authority to protect it. So the decision goes quiet. Then it comes back. Not always loudly, often through small signals. Can you take a quick look at this before we send it? Do you think the founder will be okay with this? Should we bring this back to the leadership team? I know we decided, but this case is a little different. Can we just confirm before we move? Those questions are not bad questions. They're often very reasonable, but they're also data. They tell you the decision may not have enough closure. They tell you the team may not trust the decision to stay made. They tell you the owner may not know what authority they have. They tell you the founder may still be part of the decision path, even if nobody said that out loud. And they tell you the operator may be carrying the gap between what the room said and what the system can actually do. That's why quiet decisions are expensive. They don't look expensive at first, they look efficient. The meeting ended, no drama, no major disagreement, everyone moved on, but then the cost starts arriving in pieces. One clarification, one sidebar, one cautious email, one founder check-in, one operator translation, one more meeting to make sense of what the last meeting supposedly decided. Each one is small, each one is defensible, but together They're the cost of a decision that went quiet instead of closing. And the longer that pattern repeats, the more normal it starts to feel. The team stops expecting decisions to hold. People build habits around fragility. They hedge, they soften, they delay, they keep options open. They ask for reassurance earlier than they need to. They escalate things that should have stayed within the decision. And then leaders say, why won't people own things? Sometimes the answer is because the system has taught them that ownership is risky when decisions don't stay made. That's not a character flaw, that's learned behavior. If people have watched decisions reopen casually, or watched unclear decisions create blame later, they'll protect themselves. They'll leave the room for interpretation. They'll check before committing. They'll keep the founder close. They'll let the operator translate. Again, not because they're weak, because the decision's half-life is short. The team has learned that clarity decays quickly. So what do you do with this? Well, the answer isn't to make every meeting longer. It's not to turn every decision into a formal document. It's not to police language or force people into some rigid framework. The answer is to build a better closure habit around decisions that matter. And there are a few simple tests I like to use. First, ask, what exactly did we decide? Not what did we discuss, not what direction do we like, not what seems reasonable. What did we decide? That sounds basic, but it changes the room. Because if the answer is hard to say in one or two plain sentences, the decision may not be closed yet. Second, ask, who owns the call now? Again, not who owns the task, who owns the call? Who has the right to keep this decision moving when pressure shows up? Who can say, no, that would reopen the decision, or yes, this fits inside the decision we made? Third, ask, what trade-off did we accept? This one's uncomfortable because real decisions usually cost something. If the trade-off wasn't named, people will try to preserve all sides of the decision later. They'll try to make the exception without creating precedent. They'll try to move faster without reducing scope. They'll try to protect margin without changing what sales can promise. They'll try to delegate authority while keeping founder approval intact. That's how decisions decay. The trade-off was never clear enough to protect the decision. Fourth, ask what would reopen this. This is one of the cleanest ways to extend the life of a decision. A decision does not need to be permanent. It needs to know what would legitimately bring it back. New information, a threshold crossed, a customer pattern emerging, a capacity limit reached, a risk becoming real. If you don't define what reopens the decision, almost anything can reopen it. A comment, a concern, a new example, a founder reaction, a nervous manager, a slightly different customer. And once casual reopening becomes normal, the team stops trusting closure. Fifth, ask where does the decision live after the meeting? And this doesn't have to be fancy. It might be a decision log. It could be a memo, a Slack post, a recap section, a project page, a priority closure map. The format matters less than the function. The decision needs somewhere to live that isn't just someone's memory, because memory gets edited by pressure. People remember the part that affects them. They remember the tone differently. They remember the founder's facial expression. They remember the objection that wasn't fully answered. They remember the sentence that helped their function. That's human, but it's not stable enough for important operating decisions. So if a decision matters, give it a place to live. That's how you help it survive the room. Now, let me come back to the quiet room, because I don't want this episode to make leaders suspicious of every calm meeting. Quiet can be good. A room can get quiet because people genuinely understand the decision. A room can get quiet because the trade-off has been named and accepted. A room can get quiet because the owner is clear. A room can get quiet because the team has enough to move. That's healthy. The issue isn't the quiet itself. The issue is treating quiet as proof. Quiet is not proof of closure. Behavior after the meeting is proof. When the team can act without repeated interpretation, that's a good sign. When the owner can make smaller calls inside the decision, that's a good sign. When the founder doesn't get pulled back into every edge case, that's a good sign. When the operator doesn't have to explain the same decision 3 different ways, that's a good sign. When the decision holds under normal pressure, that's a good sign. And that's what we're really looking for. Not a perfect meeting, not unanimous excitement, not a beautiful recap, a decision that still makes sense once people are back inside the work. That's why some decisions need stronger closure than others. Small decisions can live with lighter closure. Big decisions can't. Repeated decisions can't. Founder-sensitive decisions can't. Cross-functional decisions can't. Trade-off heavy decisions can't. Priorities that have already come back 2 or 3 times can't. Those decisions need more than quiet. They need enough clarity to travel. So here's the practical move I'd leave you with. Think about one decision that went quiet but keeps returning. Not one that's obviously open. Not one that everyone agrees is still unresolved. Pick one that seemed settled. The room moved on, the recap went out, nobody objected, but now it's back. Maybe it's back as a Slack clarification, or maybe it's back as a founder check-in. Maybe it's back as a customer exception. Maybe it's back as a meeting after the meeting. Maybe it's back because the operator is translating it again. Ask 5 questions. What exactly did we decide? Who owns the call now? What trade-off did we accept? What would reopen it? Where does the decision live after the meeting? If those answers are hard to find, the decision probably didn't close. It went quiet. And quiet is not closed, as I repeat myself. If this sounds familiar, don't start by trying to diagnose the whole company. Start with one decision that went quiet but keeps returning. The hidden drag diagnostic helps you see whether the drag underneath it is decision drag, alignment drag, structural drag, human drag, or a mixed pattern of those. It takes you about 7 to 10 minutes. The link is in the description. And oh, by the way, it's free. Use it on one real priority or decision, especially one where the room thought the issue was done, but the work keeps bringing it back. Because once you can see where closure broke down, you can stop mistaking quiet for progress. You can close the decision enough for the work to move. My name is Warren Wojnowski. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Hidden Drag Brief, and I'll see you next time.